Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It is Spartan Shadows podcast. We are back again, episode 6, week 5 of the college football season, heading into the Ohio State game this weekend. Coach Dantonio's retirement into the Ring of Honor at Spartan Stadium. We're here today. We're going to recap our thoughts of the Boston College game and then move right into what we got a little preview in store, I guess, for this weekend. And then wrap it up with a couple other MSU-related sport topics and bits to just add at the end. So thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you all. Zack, Emmett, how are you guys doing today?
Good. How are you doing, Emmett?
I'm doing all right. Excited for, the Tigers had to represent them today. Magic number's now down to 2.
Yeah, I had to dust my hat off. Good to see Emmett made it through the monsoon of Boston from this past weekend. We had to give him some days to get back on his ship and float back home so he could make it back for this episode. So I guess we'll start there. Boston College, a little bit disappointing of a result, a game that we were definitely in late. Boston College with a late touchdown to go ahead 23-19. We had a shot to drive down, unfortunately resulted in a turnover in the end zone. So a little bit of a heartbreaker. Guys, we got to dive into it. Ain't no time like the present. Thoughts, Zack, how'd you feel about Boston College matchup?
Yeah, so definitely gotta say that glad we're doing it today. Glad we're not doing it right after the game. I think a lot of people would have been a lot less, I don't want to say happy or happy at the result now, but I think it would have been maybe a little bit more of a passionate episode, to say the least, if it was right after that game. But Emmett was on the road, came back, like Chris was talking about, let kind of cooler things prevail a little bit. But yeah, I definitely think this is one of those games that you kind of look back at the end of the season and be frustrated by the result. But I think that's not a bad thing, to say the least, because I think we really saw that for the first time in a couple years that Michigan State fans really care, and it hurt about the result, which is something that we haven't been able to really say in a while, because in the past years when we lose, it's not even close. It's not even competitive. Like, you know by halftime that this game was going to be over. And even the wins, you kind of knew pretty early on that the games were over as well. So really kind of nice that even though it is a loss and losing is never fun, honestly, we should probably be 4-0 right now. It is kind of, I don't want to say nice to lose a close game, but like it at least brings kind of back a little bit of that feeling of saying, hey, you know what? This is a game that we should have had. We didn't have it. Not a great performance from some players. We were hurt quite a bit as well, especially at the wide receiver position. But overall, I think if you go into this game and go into Ohio State 3-1, I think fans would be extremely happy for the most part going into this season. So even though we honestly probably should be 4-0 at this point, I don't think it's one of those things that you're like super disappointed by maybe at the end of the season because you lose a close game to a Boston College team, when a lot of people going into the season was just hoping that it would be a close game, competitive game, and you're 3-1 at the end of these 4 games, which is something we talked about. So even though it's disappointing end result, I think overall, I think fans should be kind of pleased with the first 4 games.
Yeah, I agree. 3-1, not, the ideal start of 4-0, which we probably should be. We were a few plays away from winning that game. Obviously, the first play everyone thinks of is the last second interception with 2 timeouts, 36 seconds to go. That really hurt. But at the same time, a Nate Carter drop in the end zone also sunk this team, because the long touchdown to Bond would have just been a game-tying touchdown, and we could have had Jonathan Kim, who was automatic all night. Jonathan Kim was the only player on that field who did not care about the conditions. We could have been in a great position to get that field goal. But honestly, this is one of those plays. This is one of those weeks. It's year 1 of our rebuild. Year 2, year 3, we probably would have won this game. I'm sure we'll say that in retrospect too next year. The team competed. They played really. They had a lot of good plays. Obviously, those few bad plays sunk us, but at the same time, we are 3-1 right now, and a couple plays don't go in our direction, and we could have easily been 1-3 going into this Ohio State game. So it hurts, but at the same time, we've been in these close battles with FAU, which we shouldn't have been, and Maryland. A lot of us had 3-1 on the card, but we would have had a loss to Maryland. So 3-1 with our one loss being non-conference certainly helps us, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we talked about it at the start of the season, and we've mentioned it a few times since. When you break the schedule into segments like you kind of have to do, first 4 games, the first third of the season's over. We're sitting at 3-1. All of us would have signed up for that. We all on this show said we would be happy with that, and I still am. Like you said, Emmett, we're a couple plays away from being 4-0, a couple plays the other way being 2-2 or even worse. I think by and large, though, this team, these close battles teaches things more than blowout wins or losses would. The team starts to learn what they can do and can't do together and what they need to work on, and it's a good building block. We, being from Michigan and being around the Lions, have kind of seen this recently. I know not everybody who listens to us are big Lions fans, but part of what is being built in the Lions, everybody sees how good they are now and how good they can be. 2-3 years ago when Dan Campbell first got here, it was about learning how to win games, learning how to close out games, learning to do things the right way and accomplish your goals together. That's what's got to happen with this team, and games like this are big building blocks for that. So in the long run, yeah, it's a disappointing result after the game. We're sad knowing we had an opportunity to go into this game 4-0, but I think it will play dividends. Sorry. And I think it can go a long way to help righting the ship and getting us where we need to be. My getting into kind of like stock up, stock down for who we thought did really great and maybe not so great. Emmett took my first one. Jonathan Kim was unbelievable. Kicking in those kind of conditions is not easy. He looked like a seasoned pro. He looked like an NFL caliber kicker, which we know he is. He had no issue with the wet conditions, the bad conditions. The special teams did great. The blocking worked out great. Snapping, holding, all phases of kicking game was on point. So we love having good special teams. It's a really good boost. Also, shout out to Ryan Eckley and the punting unit, performed pretty well too. My other 2 biggest stock ups, the defensive line's play overall, and then I do want to shout out Jordan Hall specifically. I thought Jordan Hall probably played his best overall game at MSU so far. I know he's still young. That 4th and 1 goal line stand, that speaks for itself, obviously, but outside of that, Jordan Hall made play after play. He was in the right spot. He had a great game, in my opinion. And the defensive line overall, too. They really did get to Castellanos. They did a pretty good job containing him. There were some times that broke down a little bit, but overall, you have a mobile quarterback, and maybe it's just because I am a Lions fan. I've seen that burn us so many times. I'm just used to it. But having a quarterback who can extend plays and do what Castellanos can do, I thought they kept him in pretty decent check. Even on the other line, you saw what Aiden was able to do with scrambling, innovating. We really limited that. So hats off to those guys. I thought it was pretty well covered and pretty well done overall. The bad, unfortunately, the turnovers. And I don't want to pick on Aiden or make it sound like I'm picking on Aiden, because that's the opposite of what I'm doing. He'll be the first to admit some of those throws and decisions were not the best. He'll learn from them. He's still young. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that on this podcast, but Aiden is a very young player. He will get better. He will make better decisions. But the other turnovers, K'Ron Lynch-Adams, the fumble to open the first half, some other untimely plays like that, penalties. I thought the defense played super well to even hold BC to, 10 points out of the half when we had that turnover and gifted them 2 possessions in the danger zone already. So got to keep the turnovers in check, especially this week against Ohio State. Unfortunately, some injuries were my other stock down. Playing with a receiver core That was Montori Foster, and then a bunch of true freshmen. Not ideal, but we pieced it together, and I thought the receivers played overall pretty well. But we got to get healthy. We're having this injury bug, and my goodness, we couldn't use a bye week more if we tried. So hopefully we can get healthy and go on to that. But those are my biggest takeaways. What else you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of your takeaways are pretty accurate and kind of the main takeaways for the most part. I would say, and maybe this is more kind of like a generalization overall, and maybe some people won't agree with me on this, but I think this is one of those games outside of the turnovers. I think this was kind of a good step in the right direction, honestly. I know some people will point out the turnovers, and Aiden had 3 of them. Honestly, probably should have had maybe more 4 or 5 of them. To be completely honest with you, there's one interception that didn't happen because the 2 DBs ran into each other. So I think turnovers definitely will be one of those things that will be a point to continue to watch. But another thing that, Chris, you didn't really talk about too much, penalties. Penalties was a huge issue the first couple of weeks for this team. This game, 3 penalties for 25 yards. That is a good change. Now, it's one game. It's one of those things that you're going to have to keep repeating if you want to win some of these 50-50 games. But I really kind of want to go back to the whole Aiden Childs conversation because I do think, again, turnovers are an issue. I think some people, especially right away after the game, were kind of a little bit too harsh on him, to say the least. One, again, he's young, but 2, while people are kind of making the argument, you could kind of say, and I don't want to completely blame Aiden Childs on this loss because it's not on him. I think some people that did that was probably kind of more emotional because of what happened at the end of the game, that throwing that pick into double coverage. Aiden Childs, I believe, talked about that a little bit. I think that's going to get fixed, but we should have a conversation about Aiden Childs in this game as well, outside of the turnovers, because one conversation that I've been seeing come up is if Tommy Schuster played in this game, would Michigan State win? And I honestly would say no, and that is not on Tommy Schuster himself. I think Tommy Schuster is a good quarterback. I think Aiden Childs, while you could argue maybe lost Michigan State this game, I think Aiden Childs is a reason why Michigan State was in this game too. You saw early on in the second half when this offense was really struggling. One key play, I believe it was a 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11. He had a big scramble, got I think a huge block from Nate Carter to keep Michigan State on the field after a couple of turnovers there, but really kind of kept that offense going, didn't really give the ball back to Boston College, and then defensively, like you were talking about, Chris, this defense played extremely well for the most part outside of that one long touchdown that they gave up. But overall, I thought that this was one of those games that you kind of look at and you're like, it's kind of the Aiden Childs experience, but one of those games that you're also watching and seeing that, hey, like you see the potential, you see why fans are so excited about him, and if he can fix the turnover issue, it's going to be really fun. And we only lost this game by 4 points, and we had at least 4 turnovers in this game, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble against a pretty decent Boston College team on the road in the rain. So if you commit that many turnovers and you only lose by 4 and you have a chance at the end of the game, I would kind of take that, honestly. Should have been 1, but it's a close game.
Yeah, a couple of quick takeaways I had, even like after the game, was we really never had a play that quote unquote won us the game, but we had a ton of plays that lost us the game. It wasn't just Aiden Child interceptions. It was the Carter drop, the K'Ron Lynch-Adams fumble, giving up a 36-yard rushing touchdown when we should have tackled the running back for a 2-yard loss. There were a ton of plays we had that we could have stopped them, could have lived to fight another down, but instead something broke down and we ended up giving away a long play, giving away a touchdown. If I had to pick one play that would have won us the game, like Chris mentioned, Jordan Hall having that tackle for loss on 4th and 1. Well, 4th and goal on the 1. It was the play that flipped the game on its head. MSU drove what was that, 19 plays, 88 yards, and like 9 minutes of the fourth quarter. It was that classic Dantonio level Michigan State drive that puts away an opponent. But we just had to drop at the very end that ended up costing the Spartans 4 extra points in a 4-point loss. Mm-hmm. So, always something that to take away. Also, Tommy Schuster, great, accurate quarterback, great decisions, but he doesn't have that mobility that Childs had, which kept MSU up by 7 at half. No, I believe it was up by 7 or 4.
Something like that, yeah. I forget now.
Yeah. Kept it a it was a 2-possession game or 1-possession game at half. The Spartans, I think they'll learn from this, and I think Childs finished with like 294 yards of offense, considering that might be his worst overall body of work for the season with when you factor in the turnovers. I think that's still a really high floor for the team when you're down four of your 9 scholarship wide receivers. Another one of your scholarship receivers did not travel with the team, and I believe they were starting Jack Janicic and Zack the few times that Jalen Smith or Montori subbed out to get a breather. So It was not a recipe for winning football with the odds were already stacked against us, and MSU made it close, which honestly is something that I think I saw a tweet that 2023 MSU will lose this game by 20 points, and frankly, I agree.
Yeah, no, I do as well, certainly. And again, I don't want to make it sound like it's all on Aiden for the turnovers and the decision making, because it's certainly not. There were some times where I hate to use the reference, but I mean, he looked like prime Mike Vick, Cam Newton. Video game plays evading the rush, and it's those kind of plays that make you realize Aiden will have the talent and will be a very successful quarterback. After the game, the discourse online was a little ridiculous. Like Zack said, I think people were just a little bit too in the moment. You still saw things earlier this week talking about, top 10 NFL quarterback prospects, regardless of year, and Aiden's still on the list, right? Like, he's got the tools to be not only an elite college quarterback, but a quarterback at the next level. It's just the decision-making has to get better. It will. Keep in mind, that was his 3rd ever start. We're still young here. We still got a long ways and a lot of football left to play, so he will get better. Aiden's an absolute dog, and he's just going to learn from everything. So I'm not worried about it. I do think, these things just come with reps. And like you said, Emmett, having that many receivers down, while, like I said, I thought the receiving corps played well for what they did. And the tight ends, Jack Felling certainly had a good game, and you could tell the chemistry with him and Aiden's improving every game and every day. But overall, when you're down that many players, your chemistry is just going to be off with your receivers. I mean, no matter how much you practice with them, no matter how many reps you get with who's available, it's just not the same as it would be if Nick Marsh was playing or Jerron Glover or, whoever. And it's not an excuse, but just little things like that can compound in a game. And when you throw in bad weather and, bad decision-making, turnovers, penalties, whatever, you want to throw in on top of that, just these handful of plays each game can cost you. Unfortunately, that's what it did this time. So, like you guys said, we're caught easy pass in the end zone by a running back away. Safety's not falling down in coverage on a long pass play and coming off an injury away from maybe stopping them from scoring that touchdown. A lot of what ifs. So put it all together, get back to work this week. It sounds like they're motivated. This is going to be a big game this week. So I'm excited to see what they put back in the lab and work out for this upcoming week. So that's basically all I really had on it. The Red Bandana game itself, I thought was awesome. I thought it was an awesome atmosphere watching from home. I know, Emmett, you were there. You probably had a little bit better insight on that, but I was super glad MSU was still a part of this game. It was awesomely put together. I know Bill O'Brien talked about it a lot. ESPN did a bunch of coverage of it, and almost to the point where it might have been a little too much at times, but ESPN and the ACC network did a lot on that, and it's great to see us be a part of a big game like that. So you would have loved to come out and play spoiler and get the win, but overall, I think it was a pretty awesome game and a pretty good thing to be a part of. So, any last minute thoughts, guys, before we kind of turn the page onto Ohio State?
I agree with you, Chris. In person, it was an electric atmosphere, a lot of fun to watch. I believe before the fourth quarter, they did a recognition ceremony for either Wells' family. I'm unsure because they were playing something in the press box at the time, so we didn't get a good listener view in for it. But they did also, Boston College Media, before the game started, also thanked all of the press members for working the Red Bandana game and had a brief history of it. So that was also a really cool experience to get to, hear that. And the last thing I want to say is I want to thank Boston College Media and Athletics for letting me be able to be in that press area and get to experience that Red Bandana game. It was a lot of fun to be on field before game 2.
It definitely had to be a really cool experience that you had. Really cool game like you talked about as well. Cool tradition that they do. But let's talk about Ohio State now. This was kind of the second quote-unquote four-game spread that we talked about. Ohio State is coming into East Lansing for a 7:30 at night game. This is Ohio State's first game on the road this year, so first road test coming into a East Lansing MSU stadium that's celebrating one of the greatest, if not the greatest, head coach in MSU football history. You can argue that he's going to be, of course, honored in this game. You're going to have a lot of former players coming back as well, so that's going to be really exciting. I believe you guys are doing an interview with one of those players as well, so that will hopefully be up before the game happens. But this is a game that could be interesting if you're a Michigan State fan, because you're going to have all the emotions going into this game. You see what Ohio State has done to this Michigan State team in the last 3 or 4 years. It really hasn't been close since 2019, I believe, for the most part. But this is a Ohio State team that really hasn't played many great teams, to be honest with you. They've played Western Michigan, which shut out Western Michigan for the first time. First shutout on defense for the first time since 2019. Played Marshall, gave up 14 points to Marshall. Played Akron, gave up 6 points to Akron. So if you look at those teams, I don't really think they line up with the caliber of this Michigan State football team, especially with some of the athletes that this team has. Now, with that being said, am I saying that this Michigan State team or this is going to be a close game? No, but this could be an interesting game, though, because, like I said, it's going to be the first test of the season. You also have a very experienced Ohio State team coming into town as well. You have Judkins is the leading rusher, Travion Henderson, a name that many people have known for a long time. He's been at Ohio State, seems like, for forever. You have Emeka Buka. He was kind of wide receiver 2-3 last year, electric player. But the one player I really want to focus on is Jeremiah Smith. He's been the most electric wide receiver of this offense for Ohio State. But I think this offense is a little bit different under Brian Kelly, because I think a lot of the main kind of concerns for Michigan State fans the last at least couple of years is when Ohio State had Marvin Harrison Jr. is the deep shot. It's the shots down the field. That doesn't really seem like the Ohio State's offense this year for the most part. I know, like I said, those three teams that they play, they probably haven't had to do that too much, but they're kind of more of a dink and dunk offense right now. Again, I think it has more to do with the athletes that they have, but this is going to be another one of the games for Michigan State that you're going to have to tackle in space, because if you allow Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Buka to break a tackle, it's going to be house for a touchdown. Now, will it be as maybe electric of an offense? Maybe, but you also have Michigan State's. One of their strengths defensively is that defensive line, that front seven. and they have 15 sacks this year. So you are going up against maybe Ohio State's quote-unquote weakest part of their offensive line. I think you can argue was last year. I think it could be this year as well. If MSU can get pressure on Will Johnson, he only has 1 interception, 6 touchdowns. Again, the teams I played, he doesn't really have to do very much. If they can get pressure, could maybe make it interesting. And it is a night game, and we all know sometimes night games turn a little bit spooky, to say the least. And if it gets there, not saying MSU wins, but could make it really interesting. Do I think MSU wins? No. But could be interesting depending on how the defense plays.
Yeah, and you not to jump in front of you, I'm sorry, but it's one of those games where we don't truly know how much Ohio State's been tested. Marshall gave them a little bit of a scare to start the game last week. I know it ended up not being close. They ended up winning 49-19, so I don't want, or 49-14. Sorry, I don't want them to make it come off like I think that Marshall hung with them by any stretch, because they didn't. But you saw Ohio State's offense get loose a little bit and capitalize on some big plays, mostly because of what Zack said, missed tackling. You get the receivers out in space, and they make 1 or 2 people miss, and they can house it. It's not the big vertical threat you're maybe used to in the past that you've seen with C.J. Stroud and some of the other players that have came through there. So, I mean, currently the spread 23.5, Ohio State's favored. I'm not saying this is going to be super, super close, but like Zach said, if you can hang around and kind of put some pressure on Ohio State's front line, there is a way to make this game close. And if you come into the fourth quarter of a night game in East Lansing with Coach Dantonio and all that fanfare going on, puts the pressure on Ohio State by a lot. And I don't know if they've had anything like that so far this year. So it'll be interesting how they respond. Vice versa, this is probably the best overall team Michigan State's going to play this year. Oregon is good, and I think they're a different kind of good, but Ohio State is a very well-rounded team. So it's going to be interesting to see how MSU comes out and fares. I could kind of see it going anyway. I could see us keeping it close, but I could also see it getting away from us a little bit, depending on some turnovers, some penalties to extend drives. Some things that have kind of bit us in the butt so far this year.
One thing to keep in mind is Ohio State is also breaking in their new quarterback. This will be Will Howard's first in-conference Big Ten game. I believe he was from Kansas State previously. And then defensively, I believe we've talked about their offense and how this is less explosive but just as productive as previous years Ohio State's teams. On defense, the main thing we are going to need to avoid is going to be targeting Denzel Burke. Burke is a projected, I believe some projections have him as high as 14 overall in the draft this year. So, Aiden Childs, he's a gunslinger. He's going to, make a play. He's going to try. My best advice is just try not to try much around Denzel Burke, because he is probably the best corner we're going to face this year outside of Will Johnson of Michigan. So he will make you pay.
I was just going to say, exactly. I do think that Will Johnson is the better corner between the two, but I really think this game is going to come down to a couple of different factors. I think it's going to come down to what Aiden Childs does and what this offensive line can do for Michigan State. If they can keep Aiden Childs protected for the most part, and Nick Marsh plays in this game. I think Nick Marsh could be a huge factor in this game. Again, Jerron Glover is playing in this game. Montoya Foster, Jack Velling, they're going to play in this game. But if this offense is efficient, if this offense can run the ball, if Aiden Childs can protect the ball, then it could be really interesting. Aiden Childs has the ability to keep Michigan State in this game late. Again, though, we haven't seen it from him yet, and this is going to be the biggest game of his life. This is going to be probably the biggest game outside of Michigan State in Ann Arbor. This is going to be one of those games that if Aiden Childs comes out, I don't want to say he has to play perfect, but has to play pretty darn near perfect. If he can do that, if he can protect the ball, if he doesn't force things, if he makes those plays with his feet, maybe. But again, that's why I think it's the 23.5 point favorite for Ohio State, is because we haven't seen it. And like you guys are saying, this Ohio State team is one of the most well-rounded teams that this team will play, and you're going to need a special performance. And not saying it's not possible. We got a couple players that can do that. It's just the question is, will they do that? And if they do, could be fun. Again, the whole thing of could be fun could mean like ends up with like a 10 or 17 point loss, but like you're in it towards the end, like you're not getting blown out by halftime. But like I think one of the main things is just act like you belong on this field. Like if you act and feel like you belong on the field and you show it, I think that's a big step in the right direction, because that hasn't been a thing in the last quite a while.
Yeah, you mentioned it, Zach. I mean, what is it? The last 3 years, the Ohio State game has been the one game that has not been close, no matter what. I mean, it all stems back to even the one really successful year under Mel Tucker. We go into that game riding the highest of highs and emotions, revving, and it's 49-0 before half, and we're just a roller coaster bottoming out. So you gotta be intent. You got to be purposeful with your decisions, with your technique, everything. These are the games where one bad throw, one bad drop, one bad penalty, whatever the case may be, can completely turn against you and start kind of an avalanche effect. So there are ways to keep it close. Like we said, Aiden's got to play really well. There's no sugarcoating it. He's got to make good decisions with the ball, and he's got to kind of make some of those ridiculous jaw-dropping plays and escapes that you watch him make and say, wow, that's something right out of College Football 25. That's crazy. So it's possible, and I think some of the higher advanced metrics and stuff you see going around do recognize that. Our friend Maxwell Klickski, and I'm Max, sorry if I mispronounce your name, but he shared the College Football Insiders from Fangraphs on stuff on Twitter that I call them the fancy stats. They look at all the advanced metrics and everything based on the game. They have MSU with a 27% chance to win the game, which is higher than the sports books are going to see. Anything else is going to be, involved. They look at the projected points for Ohio State to win 28-20 roughly, which is a lot closer than you're going to find at any sports book, what Vegas thinks, what anybody else thinks. But looking at the metrics and looking at the data and what MSU does well versus what Ohio State does well, there's a path. And if you can get into the fourth quarter down 7 or down 10 and, put a little game pressure on, anything can happen. Spartan Stadium's going to be rocking. It's going to be a fun atmosphere. So it's all about limiting mistakes, limiting turnovers, and just kind of seeing what we can do. We're playing with house money, so let it ride, and maybe we hit the jackpot. So one thing I did want to shout out to, we'll touch a little bit into this with some of the bonus content we do this week, but Coach Dantonio's retirement ceremony, obviously a big thing. Any Spartan fan knows what Coach Dantonio has meant to the program, how big of an effect he had. I just want to give a quick shout out and say that I'm looking forward to this week just for simply that fact. I'm a little bit older than everybody here, so I was already in college during the prime Coach Dantonio years, so I really got to sit back and appreciate it from afar. As we know, I didn't go to MSU. I was there every weekend, and I partook in a lot of the festivities that were happening, but Coach Dantonio and how he really turned the program down, it was really amazing to see, and I think it's going to be awesome to see some of the former players come back to town. Some of the former staff, personalities associated with MSU. It's all going to be a good time. Couple of Spartan-related podcasts that I want to kind of mention. The This is Sparta MSU podcast with Jason Strayhorn and Cedric Irvin. And then the You Are the Program podcast hosted by Brian Lewerke. They've all done different things this week talking about Coach Dantonio's effect. Fun things like, should Coach Dantonio get a statue outside the stadium, which my vote, 100% yes. So just some cool things if you guys want to check out before the game. I want to give shout outs to them because they did some really good work kind of previewing Primate. And congrats to Coach Dantonio. If somehow you're hearing this, we'd love to have you on. But it's going to be a fun time, and I'm excited for Spartan fans to at least get to experience that.
Yeah, one last thing to touch on for Ohio State and Michigan State before we get to some other basketball news and everything. I was looking up Joe Rossi, obviously Minnesota's former defensive coordinator. He has played Ohio State. He has coached against Ohio State twice when he was the primary defensive coordinator of Minnesota. His two results are a 45-31 loss during the 2019 resurgent Minnesota. No, not 2019. What year was it? 2021 resurgent Minnesota year. It was 31-45, and then last season 37-3. So 0-2 all time against them. But looking at the names on Minnesota's defensive front that year, I believe that Michigan State is a little bit better or around at least the same. So I do think that Rossi will be able to scheme something that could result in moderate success against the Buckeyes. But obviously average of 38 points per game, not ideal. At the same time, I do believe Michigan State has a slightly higher talent level.
Yeah. And the linebackers, our linebackers are some of the best that he's had to work with, and he's a linebacker coach by nature. So what Jordan Hall and Jordan Turner and Wesley Matthews and Cal Halliday and insert name here, all of our guys who are just great. I don't want to leave anybody out, but you all deserve shout-outs, and I think they can really excel in this game, especially over the middle and help protecting some of those quick hitter passes that can break for big gains against Ohio State. So hopefully, they're helping in limiting that and also getting some extra pressure on Will Howard.
Exactly. So let's quickly do score predictions, get into a little bit about basketball and soccer, and kind of wrap up there.
Yeah. I'll start us. I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think. I don't know if MSU covers, but it's going to be close to what I think the spread is now with 23.5. So give me Ohio State 42, MSU 21. That'll be my prediction. First touchdown for MSU, Nick Marsh. He plays and catches a nice little fade route.
I'll go with, I believe, Ohio State's really good. I don't think MSU will be able to stick with them, but it might be close around half, end of the first quarter, maybe allow the team to start to believe. But at the same time, I'm thinking like MSU 10 and Ohio State 34, 30, I would say 37. I think that Ohio State they have that little bit more talent, and MSU just isn't quite there yet to be at the same level to compete with Ohio State or probably Oregon next week. First touchdown, I'll go with KLA on the ground.
I'm about the same. I got it a little bit closer, though. I got Ohio State 34, MSU 17. I think MSU ends up covering in this game. First touchdown, I'm going to change it up a little bit. It's going to probably end up being actually Jack Belling that's going to score the touchdown. But I actually think it's going to be Nate Carter. I think Nate Carter will be the first one that scores the first touchdown for Michigan State on the ground. I think he can have hopefully a bounce back game here. But yeah, I definitely think it's going to be hopefully a more competitive game than what we've seen in the past. But let's talk about other news going on around Michigan State. I know, Chris, you quickly wanted to say something about women's soccer, and then we'll get into basketball shortly after that.
Yeah, we'll probably dive a little bit more into basketball news, just a little bit more in depth. So I just want to shout out women's soccer team. Zack and I talked about them in our bonus episode a little bit. Excellent start to the year, went on the road, beat a very good Penn State team, and now have moved up. They are the number one team in the country officially. So congratulations to the Spartan women, making the soccer pitch look like their turf anywhere they go. And just a great, best start in school history, just a great start overall. Shout out to them. They look like a dominant force. I also want to quickly shout out MSU hockey. The first coaches poll of the season has been released. MSU will start the year ranked number 4. and also primes us up for maybe some Boston College revenge games because early in the season, mid-October, the BC Eagles are coming in to Munn. And hey, 4-2. Let's send them home with maybe some losses like we had to endure in football. But that'll be fun. I'm very excited to start diving into hockey. That BC series is going to be really good. It's going to feature several future NHLers, and I will talk about that more in depth as it gets closer. But shout out to hockey, Coach Nightingale, number 4 to start the year. The hype train for hockey is off the rails, so I'm very excited. And congrats to the MSU women on getting to be number 1. So, guys.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. Congrats to those sports. Really fun watching other sports succeed at Michigan State, being top 5 teams in the country. The women's soccer team went on the road and beat number 9 Penn State, so I think that kind of helped them get to that number 1 spot. But let's talk about the other team that started out this today, honestly, and that is Michigan State basketball. I know some fans are a little bit more down on Michigan State basketball today because of the announcement of Jalen Harrelson not going to Michigan State yesterday, going to Notre Dame, but basketball started today, so excited that basketball is here.
Yeah, don't be down. I know we've been named with a lot of high-profile recruits for this upcoming cycle. Very exciting. I think coaches have still been working his butt off in recruiting. Speaking of people that are going to get a statue in front of their athletic buildings, Coach Izzo, obviously, for what he's done. But he's having a recruiting renaissance in his later years of his career. Now, it is a bummer that Jalen Harrelson didn't come. Not a big shocker to me. We are named with a lot of other high-profile recruits. Not saying we're going to get all of them. Actually, I don't think we're going to get a lot of them. There's a few I do think we'll get, but it's just kind of the nature of the game with basketball. I mean, there's not as many high-profile players in general, and you got some really big schools going in after them. And in this NIL world, it's hard to stay with anybody, let alone outcompete some of the blue bloods. So I'm excited for MSU basketball. My hype with Frankie Fridler is becoming off the charts because the more I watch about this kid, the more excited I think he could really be. Even better than we think he might be coming into this year, and I think he could be a piece that we really needed to move forward. So basketball's coming up. His own camp out in Midnight Madness, not this weekend, but next weekend. So that's coming up quick. Emmett.
Yeah. Outside of just the recruiting news, another thing I found interesting was when Izzo had a press conference talking about the beginning of the basketball season. He mentioned that both Jackson Kohler and Xavier Booker are more working at the 4 this year, and then I'm blanking right now on who else was working at 5.
Cooper. Carson Cooper.
Yeah, Cooper. Completely blank there, sorry. But that was one thing that stood out to me. Losing the battle for Harrelson to Notre Dame, that stings. But at the same time, we, like Chris said, we have a lot. We may have spread ourselves too thin is one concern with how many different people that we have been the Spartans have been connected with recently for the recruiting trail. We'll wait and see. Obviously, the class is far from decided. We're still not even into October yet, and yeah, I'm excited to see both the recruiting trail and this basketball team gel together.
Yeah, just my last thought on recruiting, when it's all said and done, I think you're still going to see a top 15 to 10 class from Tom Izzo, potentially. It has the potential to still be up there, so I don't want you thinking missing out on Harrelson or Trey McKinney is going to be the, sky is falling news that everybody's going to think it is. So we'll wait and see. Plenty of time left, but there's still a lot of good players that are out there that I think are going to have a good effect on the program if they so choose to come here. So, Zach, if you don't have any more basketball thoughts, I got one last thing before we wrap it up, but I don't want to cut you off from any basketball thing related.
Nope, I was honestly just going to say, yeah, I definitely agree with the both of you guys, and just had any last thoughts before we wrap up the podcast.
The last thing I wanted to say and give this kind of last shout out, Larry Lage, a writer for the AP, did an article and a profile about Amarion Smith and his recent family tragedy. We talked about it on the podcast, so I don't want to necessarily go back into it all. but his article is getting a lot of traction online. It was a really well done profile, well done article, and it's getting a lot of love, and it absolutely should. And I wanted to say how much I appreciate it, just seeing it redistributed, because it's gotten more, I guess, coverage to Omarion, for lack of a better term, and the GoFundMe has benefited from it. Just seeing the kind of work Omarion's been putting in, not only on the football field, but then being the sole provider of his family now after that tragedy. Awesome stuff. It's good to see him getting a little extra shine. I know People Magazine and I think Extra and some other big name publications all picked it up after Larry wrote it. So if anybody wants to see that, go look at Larry's Twitter page. It's at Larry Lage on Twitter, at Larry Lage. You can probably see it linked and retweeted 100 times. I retweeted it. I know a few other people did. I think I retweeted it from the podcast page. If I didn't, I apologize. Go to my personal one, at Hockey Newman. But it's worth the few minutes it takes to read. So shout out to Larry. We appreciate it. And that was pretty awesome. So any final thoughts, guys?
Just nervous for this weekend.
Yep, it'll be a fun test. Emmett, as always, will be covering it. He will be live from the press box at Spartan Stadium. So follow him for more. We are hoping to get you another episode out before game time. Like Zack kind of teased, we're going to be talking with a former MSU player about some good Coach Dantonio memories. We'll hopefully get that out to you guys before kickoff on Saturday. And then, we'll follow us with live tweeting our emotions during the game, and then we'll be back next week to wrap it up and get you the Ohio State wrap-up before the team heads out on a short week to play Oregon next Friday out in Eugene, which will be another insanely tough test back-to-back. So we'll get you ready for that. Emmett is not traveling to that one, so you won't have live Emmett for the only time this year, but that's okay. We can give him a travel break, and we'll still get you everything we need to get you content-wise. So we appreciate everybody tuning in. Sorry we went a little bit longer on this episode, but we appreciate it. Lots of fun stuff to cover. It's an interesting time here with football getting into the meat of the schedule and all the other fun sports starting, so we really appreciate you guys. And if you have a question, anything you want to get to us, hit us up on our socials or our email address, which are all linked. And then we appreciate all the likes, tweets, shares, refollows, everything else under the sun. So anything else, guys, before we sign it off?
Just go green.
Go white, and we appreciate you guys. We'll talk to you next week.